Welcome everyone, good afternoon. It's great to see so many of you joining us today. I'm James, Chief Executive at London Funders, and I'm going to be briefly introducing this session that we're hosting with our friends at Trust for London, where I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Marieke van Doorninck, Deputy Mayor of Amsterdam, to share some thoughts on a sustainable recovery in conversation with Clara from Trust for London. On a practical level, today's event is being held in a webinar format, which means you can see all of us on screen, but sadly we can't see you. Despite this, we're hoping it's going to be quite a lively and interactive session. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where we'd encourage you to put any questions you have. Also, keep an eye on that box, and if you see a question in there that you'd like to make sure gets asked, you can click to like it, and that bumps it to the top of the list. We'd also encourage you to use the chat box at the bottom, which is where you can say hello, share some thoughts, ideas, resources, so we can also try and get a friendly vibe even in these virtual spaces. Today's session is going to build on some of the discussions we've had in recent weeks as part of the Festival of Learning, looking at what civil society, funders and friends did through the last year and how we can use some of the good ideas that have emerged from a very difficult year to give us a positive and progressive platform for the future. We're really keen, as I hope all of you are as well, to be open to learning and ideas from beyond London and beyond the UK. And so it's a real joy that we've got Marieke with us today. Amsterdam's launched a really interesting strategy for the city's recovery and their future post-pandemic based on the donut model of economics, where everyone has access to what they need to live a good life, but without putting unsustainable pressure on the planet. We're going to be hearing from Marieke about how this approach can work in a city context, how collaborations between sectors can shape the future, and then we're hoping we can think together about how new models could be applied here in London as well. Marieke is Deputy Mayor for Sustainability and Spatial Development for the City of Amsterdam, having previously been a member of the Municipal Council and party chair of the Green Left Party. Her background includes work for many organisations focusing on refugees and women's rights, and she was also a co-chair of the Mama Cash Foundation. So it's great to have you with us, Marieke. To get the conversation started and to chair the session, it's a pleasure to be handing over to Clara from Trust for London, who also brings a wealth of international experience to help shape today's discussions. Before joining Trust for London, Clara's work in policy, research and strategy development has led her to being internationally recognised as an expert on modern slavery, decent work and responsible business. She's worked for and advised human rights charities, UN trust funds and international bodies like the Council of Europe. So two amazing people I'm really looking forward to hearing from. Thanks everyone again for joining us this afternoon, and I'll hand over to Clara to discuss lessons from Amsterdam with Marieke.
Thank you, James, and a warm welcome also from me, Marieke, on behalf of Trust for London. And we're delighted that you are able to spend some time with us this afternoon so that we can learn about what you do in Amsterdam. So to start with, let me first ask you about the strategy that you have adopted for the city's recovery last year. It's based on the donut theory of economics, as James has already said, but that's quite a new economic concept. So it would be great if you can tell us a bit more about what it is and also why you decided to use this approach in your city.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for this invitation. It's great to talk to you and share a bit of what we have been doing in the past few years, because we're already working on this for quite some time. When I started this job as Deputy Mayor of Sustainability, a lot of people were asking me, but you come from a background of migrant rights and you come from a background of anti-trafficking. So why do you start working in sustainability? But for me, it was also a logic choice, because some of the lessons I have learned from working in anti-trafficking movement is that you can't stop trafficking by just rescuing the victim and putting the villain behind bars. You need a system change in order to stop this idea of exploitation, because trafficking, as many other problems in the world, are part of a system that is very much based on the way we produce and we consume. Because it's based on more. Our economy is based on, it needs to grow in order to survive. So it can't just stay on a certain level. It needs to be growing all the time, and you need to buy, and then throw away to buy something new. And we know that in order to do that, there's a lot of people paying the price. people who are working in bad conditions, but also our earth is paying the price for this endless consuming that we do. So we need to put a stop to it. The other thing, and so therefore bad working conditions and the devastation of our planet are within this, are in the same kind of range caused by the structure that we are, economical structure that we live in. So we were really looking at how can we make this system change and how can we make this work. And we are already working on a circular economy, so very much based on no new resources, but endless circles of recycling, reusing, repairing goods. But the problem there is how can you make that really inclusive? Because we know that quite often things that are recycled are actually more expensive than things that you can buy new. So again, you cannot have a circular strategy without this idea of system change. And Kate Raworth, when she launched her donut principles, it was actually what we needed. We needed something that was more than just changing one way of working to the other, but we needed this system change. And she showed us the donut, and I'll just try to hope I can make this work so I can share the slideshow with you. Do you see it?
Not at
No?
the moment.
Okay, well, I can see it, so there's a little bit of a problem. I'm sorry about this. Then maybe we have to do without, or I'll just send a very quick message.
Marleen can share the screen. Marleen from London Funders can help us and share the screen for you.
Does she have the?
Yeah, I think it's coming up now. So,
I'm sorry about this. I can also do it without, but it would be good if I could.
It would be helpful to see this the donut picture.
So it's the, I think it's the second where it actually shows the donut. Yeah, just a few slides before this one.
No, we can see the donut now.
Yeah, but it's actually it's the Amsterdam donut, and I wanted to show you Kate's donut because it's a bit more. So it's on my screen. It's the second. Okay, so they took it. So you've got another one. I'm sorry about this. Yeah, it's fine. So the idea of the donut is that you cannot have a thriving city if people or planets are left behind. So the idea is that you actually need to be sure that nobody falls within the inner circle of the donut, because the inner circle of the donut is the social foundation that everybody needs. So you need good housing, you need a good income, but you also need a political voice. You also need a social equity and equality. And you also need peace and justice. So these are really the social fundament that everybody needs in order to have a good life. Doesn't mean you have to have a life where you have everything, but you have to have what you need in order not to fall within this social gap. On the other side, there is the planetary boundaries. And we also need an economy that doesn't go beyond the planetary boundaries. So we have to make sure that the way we live and the way we work doesn't cause climate change, or doesn't pollute the oceans, or doesn't pollute the air. And this sweet spot between the social foundations and the ecological ceilings, that is what we call the donut. And if you live within the donut, and if you can make your economy within the donut, then you know you are a thriving city, which is something different than an economically extremely wealthy city, but you are a thriving city. And what we asked Kate to do for us is to make a city portrait and to actually look at how we were doing on these different levels. And these levels are seen as, and Kate calls it lenses. So you have 4 different lenses. And what you need to do in order to make this city portrait is to see on a social level and a local level what it would mean for people of Amsterdam to thrive. So what they need to have justice, what they need to have, a roof over the head, etc. But at the same time, you have to do that on a global level to see what does Amsterdam have to do in order to respect the well-being of people worldwide. And the second and third lens have to do with what we have to do on ecological sealing. So what do we have to do in order to have our own habitat as a healthy habitat, but also to make sure that we do not negatively impact the health of the rest of the planet. And these 4 lenses that Kate made for us made a city portrait. So it showed us where we have our deficits, and it showed us where we were doing well. And sometimes it can be a bit, it looks like you have both ways. For example, we are a very wealthy city. One of the ways how to measure to be a wealthy city is your BPD. And what did it show us? It's very high because our prices of houses are extremely high. Does that make us a rich city or actually a very poor city because we cannot afford the people of Amsterdam to have a good living because they cannot rent the houses. So as a wealthy city, we are doing poorly by being so rich that people actually cannot afford housing. So you have a completely different way of looking at your own economy, a completely different way of looking at your own well-being, because there's people who are falling short in the donut because they cannot afford a house. So the city donut that Kate has made for us is, in a way, it's a mirror because it shows us how we're doing. And at the same time, it's a monitor because this year she will come back and she will see how we are doing after a year of a donut. Or next year she will come back and see how we have done after 2 years trying to work within the donut and actually have we progressed or not. On one point, we can already see that we're progressing, for example, with air pollution, as we have stronger laws against emissions from cars in the city. So this is how we can actually, put this mirror and actually be very honest to ourselves how we're doing, and at the same time have this monitor. The funny thing is we've never adopted this model for the recovery after COVID. It was Kate and I had already made an appointment with the journalists of The Guardian because we were launching our strategy. It was early March and we wanted to launch this city donut. We wanted to launch the Amsterdam circular strategy, and then COVID hit us. And we really thought, should we do this? Should we launch this whole idea when everybody is worried about their health? Everybody's only looking at, will I have a job today or tomorrow? And then we thought, but actually it is especially in crisis times where you have to think, what is most worth to me? And a lot of people were not saying, this endless growth. A lot of people were thinking, my health, the health of the people I love, and maybe also the health of this planet. So people were looking at how can we actually come out of this crisis, not by going back to business as usual, but base our economy on the things that really matter. And I do think that the donut helps us to base our economy on things that are really worthwhile. So we had the interview. We never really had the launch because we were all in lockdown, but we had a launch because of the interview in The Guardian, the whole donut idea of Amsterdam became this worldwide thing that everybody is asking, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And sometimes we have to say, we are exploring. We don't have all the answers. We are learning by doing, and we're setting up some programs to see as a city if we can actually thrive by not having this large footprint. That was a quite long answer, but
I love the idea of holding up a mirror and looking at what is it that you see when you look at your city, and I suppose the next thing that would be really interesting to hear is sort of how did you move from the depiction? How did you move from these 4 lenses, the strategy, a bit of a theoretical framework to reality? So who was involved in developing actions following that? And perhaps if you could give us a few examples of what does it look like in practice? What has worked so far? But also, challenges and anything unexpected. Obviously, you launched it in a very unpredictable period of time.
Well, maybe I can have another slide, because it kind of shows how we started working with that. I'm not sure. I think it's the 5th slide. No, one before that one. Yep. So this one. So we actually started working with huge amounts of people, mostly civil servants, but also people from external market parties. And we really started to look how we were doing. And we really started to look like, where are we? And actually, what is your position in this as a citizen, as a civil servant, as a business leader? Where do you stand? And actually, what can you do in order to reach this sweet spot between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling? So immediately we knew that this was not something that the government can do. This is something that society actually needs to embrace, and a society as big as it is. So not only civil society players, but also very much business leaders to take it on. So when we started to show this portrait in neighborhoods and start working with people and say, actually, what are the things that you can think of that are needed in your neighborhood in order to be more circular, and what kind of donuts things that you can do. So we made this whole circular strategy together with people of Amsterdam and with businesses in Amsterdam, and also asked them, what is your role and what can you do? And out of that, we had already a few projects where you can show some of the slides. I think it's the next one. Yes. So one of the great things that we did was make a deal with all the denim factories in Amsterdam and the big brands. Amsterdam is really a denim city, and we have lots of the big brands are based in Amsterdam. And we told them, you realize that you're one of the most polluting industries that are there. Denim is extremely polluting because of all the washing, all the fabric it needs, all the cotton it needs. And so we started working on how can we change this. And we now made a deal where the denim factories said at least 20% of all the materials that we use will be, for the first year, will be 20. And the next year we will raise that. So that will be more. But even, I like this idea of recycled goods. But the other thing, what they're doing is they have this big kind of, which is both the factory and more a laboratory, where they're starting new ways of producing denim in a less damaging way, where they also have repair shops for denim. Because one of the best things in order not to have waste is to repair and recycle. So they're also teaching people how to repair their jeans and make it into new items. So they really want to make this circle round. One of the other things that we did was very much focused on COVID, was that there was a lot of farmers in the surroundings of Amsterdam who couldn't sell their goods anymore, their products anymore, to the restaurants. So we started to work together with the farmers and some social foundations to make sure that these leftovers were being brought to people with low income. So we have now a big project which is called Farmers for Neighbors, which they already said we're going to keep on doing this because it works so well. And we also teach a lot of people in Amsterdam, especially with lower incomes. We can teach them where actually food comes from, so they can also come and pick it up with the farmers themselves. We have these change on how that goes, but it also makes sure that people have healthy goods for little money. And we all know that in this strange economical system that we're living in, quite often unhealthy food is much cheaper than healthy food. So we make sure that healthy food is actually available for people with low income, and people with low income can work at the distribution center. So we kind of try to make the circle round. And in most all of the projects, that what we do is try to make the circle round. So look at ideas of employment to make sure that people have jobs, make sure that it's circular, so no waste is being made, and if there's waste, it's being used again. and to make sure that actually it has a social impact on a larger group than only the people directly involved. One of the other things is what we're having in all around the city right now are repair cafes. And it's places where you can bring your stuff which is broken. And we have forgotten how to repair things. We are so used to live in a disposable society where we throw everything away. And here people are taught how to repair their own goods. Together with that, we have set up a lobby to the European Commission that actually we need to have producers' responsibility, that actually the producer has to be able that whatever you buy, there is a right to repair, because quite often things are made to be broken. And so we try to do things on a very small level and having this repair cafes, and at the same time have a lobby towards the European Commission and say, if you don't change this, we can never make it work. Because if it's still cheaper to dig some new materials or new resources on the other part of the world, ship them all over to Amsterdam with all the pollution that it causes, and then make products here that are meant to be broken, it will never weigh up against the repair, or repair can never weigh up against that. So we also need that structure change, but we won't wait until the government or the European Commission works on this structure change. We start working on it ourselves. So these are some of the few products some of the few projects that have been launched since the donut economics. And what I really like about it is some of them are done by the municipal workers, but most of those deals are deals that are made within a neighborhood or within a group of people, where they try to combine the ecological part and the social part of the donut.
These are some really fantastic examples, and I like the idea in particular how you're managing to marry the two, that it's not either or, but actually it needs to be both people and the environment. We talk about within the network of funders here, we talk a lot about collaboration and different actors and players and different sectors working together, and the challenges and the learning that comes with it. How did that work in the Amsterdam context? Sort of what actors, what particular sectors were involved? You talked about the denim producers, but obviously there is many more. So was there any particular challenges or anything that surprised you in the collaboration?
Well, we are focusing right now on 3 streams, because we, as a city, we cannot do everything. And I have to say, I was also a little bit, we're saying Amsterdam is embracing this, but we're very much still looking at the circular economy, because that's my department. So if you want to have everybody involved, it takes years. So I started it, and the good thing is that many of my colleagues now want to see how they can also join. And maybe not because I was telling them, but mostly because people of Amsterdam and some businesses were saying that, oh, I think you are working on this circular now, you are working on this donut now. We want to be involved, we want to be part of this. So one of the things is that really by launching smaller projects, then people start looking at it and saying, okay, we can also do this. For example, one of the projects that we also launched in the beginning of COVID times was a project which is called Everybody Connected, because of course a lot of children had to do their online lessons, and in many households, especially with low incomes, they didn't have enough laptops and devices. My colleague from education, she said, okay, I will buy a lot of laptops, but of course that was not enough. So I said, well, maybe we can do it in a different way. So I said, let's collect devices that people are not using anymore, especially from the government, but also from other parts, have them refurbished by people with maybe a distance to the labor market, and then bring them to people with low incomes. And there we already started working with, for example, this refurbishing company, who said then, oh, but we can also do this for other companies. We don't need the government to be part of this. We can do it without you. Again, with the organization working with people with low income, they said, okay, we now have a distribution system. We can do it by ourselves. So that was something that was surprising me, how easily people are adopting the idea of making these networks that are both looking at the ecological part and looking at social foundations that are needed. So one of the things that surprised me is how easy people pick it up and actually start working on it. And in 2 weeks' time, we will have the launch of the Johan Cruijff Arena, which is the stadium of the football club Ajax, which is the biggest, well, of course, as Amsterdam, I would always say it's the biggest club in the Netherlands and also very in Europe important. But, you know, it's a place where kind of everybody comes together. You know, football, it's the soccer, it's the place where everybody meets each other, and they were already working on the sustainable development goals. And when they learned about the donut, they thought, we want to be the first donut area in Amsterdam. So they started working with other groups around them and say, what are the things that we can do? So what they're doing now, they already have solar panels on their roof, but they're now sharing the electricity with the neighborhood. So when the arena doesn't need it, they can put it into the neighborhood and they can make this circle again. Right now, they are working on a organic waste to make organic waste into gas. And they built this whole machine. They're collecting organic waste from the whole neighborhood, so from restaurants, from markets, from individual houses. So everybody is joined together and they're making gas, which they're using in the arena, and people from the neighborhood are working there. And some of the compost they are using for the grass of the football mat. And they're telling everybody who is coming to the football stadium what they're doing. So they're also reaching out to people who would not easily think about sustainability or donuts or whatever. Well, they think about donuts, but in a completely different way. So you're reaching out to a much larger group. So I really like the fact that the city of Amsterdam is supporting. We are trying to bring people together, but quite often you see all these little donut deals coming up in the city because people like the idea of doing things in a different way. I also do think that COVID kind of made us much more aware of your local environment. You know, we couldn't go anywhere, so we're much more used to how can we actually handle this within our own neighborhood? Can we set up these little, you know, local systems where we can actually work together, look after each other, and again look after the planet. So some of the things are still very hard. Sometimes people ask me, how can we actually, you know, duplicate this, or how can we do this in another part of the city? And I say, we can't. These are local things, and some of the theories behind it, you can duplicate, you can do it. But you know, there's not kind of system that you can actually roll out all over the city and they say, now we are a donut city. It is about these sparks everywhere where you actually have to start doing it. And quite often it's business leaders that are inspiring business leaders. It's neighbors that are inspiring each other. So that is, I think, is the biggest thing working. It's not me telling a business leader what to do, but it's the director of the Johan Cruijff Arena, which is, you know, a big thing in Amsterdam, that are telling other business leaders, we are doing this. Are you joining us? Will you become part of this network?
Wonderful. Well, I hope that Ajax is going to challenge perhaps some of the London clubs to start thinking about these things as well. Before we go into questions from the audience, I wanted to ask, what advice would you have for London as we are starting to think about where do we move from now in the process of recovery and in the future, and in particular, what would you think that we could do as funders that focus on funding work in London?
Well, I think what London could do is, you know, to make a city portrait and to actually see how you're doing. My example of if there's affordable housing in a city, I think London and Amsterdam are quite similar. And you know, it's good to actually have this mirror and to see how you're doing on different levels. I think one of the things that sometimes people tell me isn't this whole idea of local economies and really looking at local networks, isn't it, you know, as we call it in the Netherlands, hiding behind your own dikes and not looking further. But I do believe in thinking globally, but acting locally. So to see actually where you can make the change in order to have a better world. So it is really looking at what is the impact of what we do on other parts of the world. But you don't wait for the other parts of the world. You don't wait for the national government. You don't wait for the European Commission to do something, because we have to start acting now. Climate crisis is the biggest crisis that is affecting us right now. And we see it a little bit, but we know that our children and our grandchildren will extremely be affected. So we have to start acting now. And I think the great thing is when you start acting as a local government, you don't need all the answers. You just have to be very clear and say, this is the direction where we're going, and please join us. And we will facilitate you. We will make things happen. We will sometimes subsidize you, sometimes finance you, but this is where we're going. And I do think that really helps if you're not afraid to give direction also to businesses, and sometimes say, but if you're free to do whatever you want. But if you really don't want to be part of the game, then maybe London is not the best place for you. And sometimes you have to be quite strict on that and say, well, we're creating an alliance here of the willing. But that also means that we cannot all the time still support the unwilling. And that is also making choices. And that's also making, okay, this is the gang we're working with. And the others, well, sorry, but we have a task to do. And so I do think it's making a clear choice if you want to make change happen, and to make sure that this change and this step is inclusive. So don't try to start figuring out everything by yourself by making theories and strategies, but actually invite everybody to make theories and strategies with you. And don't be afraid that if your theory doesn't work, that you have to give up everything. You just have to say, okay, what went wrong? And maybe we need another bypass, and we will go on. And that helps if you have a lot of people working with you, because then you have a lot of people helping to make that also sometimes go a little bit one direction, see if it works, and then go another direction. And what funders can do, as I said, donut deals are not made by the city. Donut deals are made by people who are actually reaching out to their neighbors, to the businesses, and see how can we do something here on a local level that both make sure that we create employment for people, that we are socially inclusive, because it's not always about money. It's sometimes just by distributing, it's about sharing. The circular economy is also about how can you make sure that we don't have all this stuff in our houses, that actually we can also share. You don't need this kind of drilling machine if you only put on a portrait on the wall once a year. You can actually have a neighborhood app where you can say, okay, who has the machine right now? Can I borrow it tomorrow? And somebody else can have it another day. So it's not only about money, it's about sharing, it's about redistributing, it's about repairing, and everybody can join in that. So whereas if you only look at a climate crisis in a very technical way and say we're changing fossil fuels to biofuels, we're changing this car to an electric car, the problem is that it becomes very eco-elite, that it becomes not affordable for the amount of people that we have. But if you have a platform where you can share cars, you don't need to own a car in order to, or to possess a car in order to have some ownership over a car, if you have a completely different way of thinking about material stuff. So what funders can do is actually see if those platforms arise in London, how you can support them and actually connect them to others who are also doing something. Because that's what I really like about donut deals, is quite often 3 parties start with one on the ecological side, one on the inclusive side, one on the social part or jobs, and then quite people start connecting and joining in. So it is really about building networks. And I think funders can have an amazing role in there, because so many organizations that you support, and you can connect them together, and maybe together they can be much more than just the sum of 2, but maybe they can bring in so much more. And I know there's donut deals in London.
Oh.
There's a donut coalition in London, so.
That's very interesting to hear. So thank you for all of that. I've been watching the questions that have been coming through. So let's see if we can answer some of those. You've already mentioned the issue of housing, and you know that London is very similar, and probably the situation is even worse here. So we have a question here from someone who is anonymous. I would love to hear a bit more about what you're doing on housing policy in Amsterdam.
So we, since we started this local government 3 years ago, we have said that in all the new buildings, we need to have 40% of social housing, 40% of prices for middle incomes, and only 20% of expensive housing. Which is completely new, and so it also took a lot of discussions with the people the developers who were building these blocks, because they're not used to that. But we cannot afford to be a city for only either the very rich or the few people living in social housing. So you need to have this balance of different types of housing. We also said, for example, one of the problems that we also have in Amsterdam is that a lot of people buy to let. So they buy a lot of houses and then start renting them out. So we set up this rule where actually you can't do that anymore. So if you buy a new house, you're not allowed to rent it out. You have to live there yourself. And so some of the rules that we made are quite severe. But we need that in order to keep housing available for everybody who wants to live here, because we don't want to, either be a resort for the very rich, or either be a resort for only the people who are already living here. But you need to have a city which is alive, and so people come in and out, and you need everybody in the city. That also means you need housing for everybody in the city. But I think this is a very clear example where, as a city, you have to give the directions. You can't leave it to the market. You have to take your role and protect your citizens.
Thank you for that. And another question that came through from Stuart, that Stuart says that Amsterdam City Council comprises many different parties from across the political spectrum, and asks, how did you sell this whole idea politically? And there is also a PS that Stuart loves the idea of that being a rich city is not the same as a wealthy city. And he was a Green parliamentary candidate in 2019. Okay.
Well, we do have a coalition government. So yes, in council there's parties from the whole spectrum, but within the city government we have the Liberal Democrats, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and that is my party, and the Socialists. So we think it's a big range. In other countries they would just say a bunch of lefties, but so yes, right-wing parties are not part of the government. So yes, we have big discussions within the council, but within the government, although there's just differences in opinions on how actually to get there, the goal I think is the same. So and sometimes it helps that when you start a coalition government, you make some agreements on some of the things you're going to do, and then while you're on in your term, then sometimes for one of the parties they can say, oh my God, is this really, so this is what we agreed upon? And then we say, yep, it's harsh, but it's what we agreed upon. So you have to, sometimes it's hard to stick together, but as a city government, we're still doing that.
That's great to hear. And a question from Maud. In London, there are quite a few local councils that have declared climate emergency a few years ago, but few have come with a strategy, or even fewer had actually started implementing it. And people seem to be kept away from decision-making in that process. Have you used people assemblies in Amsterdam to get people engaged?
Well, not the official people's assemblies, but what we have done with both our a roadmap to a climate neutral city 2050, which is another strategy, but it's very close, of course, to this circular strategy. But it's much more based on really climate change and has less of this social inclusion thing. But also for the circular strategy, we have engaged a lot of people in working on the strategy. So what we did was kind of made social or climate deals with a lot of organizations. But we know we are still working with what we call the front runners of people who are working on sustainability. We need to involve everybody, which is kind of hard, because if you're struggling to make it to the end of the month on your salary, it's hard to think about the end of the world. So it's you need other ways to engage everybody. And one of the things that we are working right now on, because we also need to take off most of houses off natural gas and have them in sustainable heating, which is a huge operation that we're working on. But it also gives the opportunity that actually you come to the houses, so you can start the discussion. And one of the other things is what we're doing is looking at to create green hubs in different parts of the city, especially where people with low incomes, because they can benefit a lot by using less energy, because energy is extremely expensive. So if we can support them in insulating their housing and things like that, then they can save money. So we have different ways on starting the conversation, and it's not always about now we're gonna save the earth. Now sometimes it's really the conversation is about how can we make sure that you can actually pay your gas bills or your energy bills, and that helps. It doesn't make the conversation always easy, because a lot of people find it very difficult, these big changes that are ahead of us if we want to fight climate change.
Yeah, I like the idea of actually talking about what does it mean for individuals, and that not everybody is going to save the planet, or should be actually thinking about it as a first thing. And again, the connection between the social and the ecological ceiling is very visible from what you have just described. We've heard another question that has come through is that we've heard a lot in the sector, in the charity sector and amongst funders, how COVID was a catalyst for a lot of work. Was there anything that the pandemic prevented you from doing or prevented from happening in Amsterdam?
Actually, in the end, no. I was very scared that most of these sustainable programs that I had just launched or started wouldn't go through, because it would all stop. But actually it didn't. I was just coming back from the opening of solar panels on schools, on the rooftops of schools. And it was just after COVID hit when I had a discussion with all the boards of the schools and say, what are you going to do about sustainability, and are you actually going to put solar panels on your roof, which is also on an educational basis very good, so that children can see what schools can do or what you can do with your roof. And I thought, well, they have so much on their mind right now, they're never going to make it within 1 year. And then a month ago, they sent me this message and said, well, we managed to make all these panels on all the schools, and can you come by to officially open them on the 3rd of June. So actually a lot of people, kept on working, because we know that we cannot wait until COVID is over in order to address climate change. The other thing is, and I do have a little video, but we don't have to show it, but Amsterdam set up this kind of recovery plan next to the donut on very concrete things that we can do to see if we can recover in a sustainable way. So we set up this scheme for solar panels on social housing. So actually people would have solar panels on their houses, and they could, normally then the money goes to the owner of the building, but now it goes to the tenants of the building, which is something new, that by subsidizing we can actually do that. But we can also create jobs by doing that, because we have people working on, putting those solar panels on all these houses, and we can also do some education to train people to do that. The other thing is that we set up to insulate housing. So we set up a program of what we call 6 engines for a sustainable recovery that includes both new jobs and at the same time make sure that all the plans that we had for the roadmap to become a sustainable city would not stop. So yes, we had to do something ourselves, but also I noticed that also showed the market that if we were not stopping, they could also continue. So there was no excuse for them to stop because we were quite clear and saying we're not stopping. We're going ahead with all these programs, even the fact that we live in a completely different time right now. But one of the things that COVID shows us that the emergency of working on sustainability is even more evident right now.
I love the example of the solar panels that you have given, and if we have some time, it would be great to understand the ins and outs of it a little bit more. But we have a question from Bharat, the CEO of Trust for London. Bharat really likes the idea of the local refurbishment of laptops and computers for use in schools and by pupils. What links do you have with our London mayor about sharing this great idea and the wider issues that you have explained to us today? There is a London Recovery Board, but we haven't heard this idea talked about it yet.
Actually, I'm not sure whether we have very close contacts with London on this idea of sustainability, but I would love to come by and show some of the things that we have been doing and probably also be learning from London what you have been doing. So I know there are some cities that we are working with, like Brussels and Copenhagen, on the donut, but not yet with London.
So that's perhaps a challenge and an idea to bring it back to the Recovery Board, and an invitation to get in touch with Amsterdam. We've got a few more minutes left for another question. If anybody has got another question, please type it in. Otherwise, maybe we can have either the video that you talked about, or perhaps you can talk a little bit more about I'm really interested in the solar panel idea. Because one of the things that we know from London is fuel poverty is a huge issue, and people can't afford to heat their houses, can't afford to use the electricity. So that would be great to hear. But I've seen another question that has just come in. So let's take that one from Shaunette, my colleague at the Trust. Do you share the learning from the various projects or spark ideas within communities?
Yes, we do. So we are collecting everything that happens. We work closely with the Donut Coalition, which is a civil organization. It's not set up by the government. It's about a lot of people enthusiastic about the donut, making donut deals in their own neighborhoods and working together. So I think they are the greatest platform. As I said, most of the times neighbors learn from neighbors. They don't learn or from the city government, but we try to make sure that all this knowledge and everything which is being done is being shared all the time. So most of the times we don't do it ourselves, and sometimes so much is happening even with the projects of our own organization within the city government, that when I have to do a presentation, or when I want to do a presentation just as this, I will ask the people working on it and say, do we have more examples? And they said, how many do you want? So now a lot is happening, and sometimes it's initiated by the government and then people take over. Sometimes when it comes, for example, to these solar panels or this idea of insulating houses, it's other partners. It's a bit less people from Amsterdam, and it's a bit more all the businesses that are actually working on. So working with, the people making the solar panels, but also working with the branches that install them. So it's actually a good networking helps in order to spread the idea. So yes, we do it like once a year, then we make a nice prospectus of everything what has happened. But most of the things that are being shared amongst each other. And sometimes even the government's not part of that. But I'm looking forward to that, maybe within half a year, when Kate will start working on our new portrait. Then we can show her, then we have a little nice booklet on everything what happens in Amsterdam, some of the things that were planned, and quite probably many things that were not planned, but just happened. And maybe some of the things that failed, because sometimes things fail. And then you start over.
That would be really, really good to see once you've got the second portrait done and the learning. I think we'll be very keen to hear that what worked. In particular, learning from failure is always a good way how to test your ideas and try new things. This was very interesting, Marieke, and wonderful to have you, and delighted that you have found time to join us this afternoon and share your experience with us. I'll just hand over to James to say a few final words before we close and let you go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Clara, and thank you also to you, actually, because I think when you first got in touch with us, Clara, with the idea for a session like this, I was really excited, and having heard Marieke just sharing ideas and experiences there, that's definitely lived up to our hopes in terms of what we wanted to get out of this session. That idea that there is the inspiration, there is the ideas, but there's also some of that practical stuff that we can think about. How can we learn together? How can we think about some of these ideas for London? So thank you, Marieke, for being so generous with your time and your experiences with us, and thank you, Clara, as well for bringing this session together and for leading us through that conversation. I think we also know, Marieke, there's lots of interest from across the network from people who haven't been able to join us for today's session. So we have recorded this, and we are going to be making a link available to the wider network as well. I'm sure everyone who's on the call will be sharing ideas with the network and thinking about how we can apply some of this here in London. And for me, what's been fantastic is you talked a bit about energy and that sort of sense of how you power a city or power a community. But I think energy has been one of the themes of discussions recently from people who worry that we don't quite have the energy or the ideas to actually build a fairer or a greener or a more successful future for our cities. And I certainly feel that when we share ideas like this across cities and across communities, we get that inspiration and we get that energy that gives us that platform to be able to bring about some of the change that we do all want to see to bring about that fairer future for our cities. So I'm really hopeful we can continue these kind of links and learn together as we look ahead beyond COVID-19. So thank you for being so generous in sharing with us.
Well, it was absolutely a pleasure, and I do think that especially when you look at energy, it's something that is so, people really start working together, and we now have a neighborhood. One of the slides was you could see some living boats, houseboats, where they want to have an ecological little neighborhood, and one of the things that they're doing is they share their energy, like the football stadium is also doing, which quite often we're not allowed to do that because of international regulation. But by sharing energy, it also and by making it yourself, it's much more than just switching the light bulb. Sometimes at least you see where energy comes from, what it means, and that actually you can share it with your neighborhood. So quite often solar panels in a neighborhood is the first step for people to realize what it is, how important it is, and actually how you can make these changes. So it's always inspiring to work on that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And turning on light.
It's the same thing as waste, by the way. It's very funny to see how neighborhoods can connect because of waste, and they collect it themselves and they make compost and things like that. So it's, there's so many inspiring things. And maybe the biggest lesson is never to do everything by yourself as a government, but to live on the energy of people, because that's the most beautiful energy there is.
What a perfect sentence to end on, Marieke. Thank you so much, and hopefully that energy can sustain us as we go through this next phase, and we can bring some of these ideas to life here in London, and we can continue to share. As I say, I'm conscious of time. I'm really grateful to everyone who's joined us, who's put questions in the chat. I'm particularly grateful to Marieke and Clara for that fantastic conversation. We'll share this link for the recording with everybody so you can share it with your networks. We'll be putting it out through the London Funders network as well. So do share these ideas. Do think about how we can work together on them here in London, and also how we can continue to share beyond our own city and bring others together in this movement towards a more progressive future. Thank you everyone for being part of today. We look forward to seeing you again soon, but for now, enjoy the rest of your day.